Attention! This video is intended exclusively for educational and informational purposes and does not contain any calls for illegal actions. All materials used in this video are historically accurate. My channel is against the promotion of Nazism, violence, and the incitement of interethnic or religious hatred. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and remember, it is important to know about any period of history, at least to prevent it from happening again. Hello everyone, this is Brief History. It has been more than 10 years since the death of terrorist number 1, Osama bin Laden, yet he is still remembered around the world. If in Europe and the United States his name evokes exclusively negative emotions, then on many Arab forums people use his image as their avatar and speak of him with undisguised admiration, as a hero of Islam. So who was this man really, and how did he become the organizer of the September 11th attacks? Before we answer these questions, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now sit back and make yourself comfortable, we're starting. Music. Applause. The history of the bin Laden family begins in the early 1930s, when Mohammed bin Laden moved from southern Yemen to Saudi Arabia. There, he first worked as a laborer in the port of Jeddah and later started his own business. Eventually, Mohammed became the owner of the largest construction company in the country. Bin Laden rose so high that he gained access to the royal family and received contracts to build palaces. In the 1960s, Mohammed took part in the struggle for the throne between the ruling monarch and Crown Prince Faisal. Bin Laden supported the latter and won. The grateful monarch issued a decree that effectively made bin Laden a monopolist in the kingdom's construction business. All contracts were awarded only to his company. In addition, the successful businessman became the Minister of Public Works. It is not known how his competitors felt about this situation, but his employees could not even think of disobeying his orders. Good question. The link is in the description. The former leader of the organization Al-Qaeda, a banned organization, Osama bin Laden, was born on March 10, 1957. He was the 17th child of a wealthy magnate. In addition to the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on September 11th, bin Laden was suspected of organizing several major terrorist attacks, including the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York on February 26, 1993, a car bombing in Riyadh on November 13, 1995, a truck bombing near a U.S. Air Force barracks in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, in June 1996, and the bombings near U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, on August 7, 1998. A devout Muslim, Mohammed raised his children in a highly religious environment. Pilgrims often stayed in the bin Laden household, and frequent guests included respected scholars, theologians, and leaders of Muslim movements. Osama spent his youth in Jeddah, where he finished school and then college. At the age of 17, he married a distant relative from Syria, although, according to other sources, she was his cousin. During those years, he wrote poetry, studied interpretations of the Quran, and played football as a central forward. Incidentally, the future terrorist number 1 was a fan of London's Arsenal. A turning point in his life came when he enrolled at King Abdulaziz University, where he became close to Islamic studies lecturer Abdullah Azzam, who in his youth had been associated. In 1979, just 2 weeks after Soviet troops entered Afghanistan, friends from the religious organization Jamaat-e-Islami invited him to Peshawar, near the Afghan border. There, the young Osama met refugees and leaders of the Afghan resistance. His first visit to the Afghan Mujahideen lasted no more than a month, but it left a strong impression on the deeply religious young man. After returning home, he began persuading his influential brothers to support the Mujahideen. Later, during the Afghan War, 1979 to 1989, Osama fought against Soviet forces. During this period, together with Palestinian Abdullah Azzam, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, a banned organization, he created the movement Maktab al-Khidmat, the Services Bureau, to channel fighters and funds to the Afghan resistance. The Bureau established recruitment centers worldwide and organized and financed military training camps in Afghanistan and Pakistan. If you want to learn more about that war and the history of Afghanistan, check the link. Finally, in 1988, Osama bin Laden founded the organization Al-Qaeda. which in Arabic means the base, a transnational militant network whose primary goal was to support Arabs fighting in Afghanistan against the USSR. After that, for several years, traces of bin Laden were found in Yemen, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Lebanon. He was involved in recruitment and the establishment of training camps where militants were prepared. After returning to his homeland in the late 1980s, bin Laden continued to financially support militant training. Following the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden lost interest in the USSR and Russia as adversaries and almost completely shifted his focus to issues affecting the Arab population, Palestine, and the presence of American troops in Muslim countries. Osama bin Laden's anti-government activities prompted the Saudi authorities to expel him from the country, after which he moved to Sudan. 3 years later, Osama bin Laden was stripped of his Saudi citizenship. 2 years after that, Sudan, responding to persistent requests from the United States and the threat of sanctions, expelled the terrorist number 1 to Ethiopia. A month later, bin Laden found refuge in Afghanistan, where he continued his extremist activities. Osama bin Laden was married 5 times. According to unconfirmed reports, one of his wives was the daughter of Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar. However, reliable information exists only about 3 of his wives: Khalid and Hamza, both natives of Saudi Arabia, and the Yemeni Amal Ahmed Abdel Fattah. Information about his children is contradictory, but most sources agree that Osama had 17 sons, whose whereabouts remain unknown. During this period, Osama did everything he could to build a reputation as a fanatic terrorist, both in Europe and in Afghanistan. For example, at the end of 1996, he sent letters to the leaders of European countries whose troops were stationed in the Persian Gulf. Bin Laden threatened terrorist attacks if there was another strike against Iraq and demanded the withdrawal of troops by the end of Ramadan. When the deadline passed, nothing changed, but no attacks followed either. Experts believe this was a show of force intended to impress the Taliban, who at that time were a new and promising force in Afghanistan. If you want to learn, in any case, Osama bin Laden achieved his goal. The Taliban not only guaranteed his safety in Afghanistan but also allowed him to move to their capital, Kandahar. When information about assassination attempts on their honored guest emerged, a meeting took place in early 1997 between Taliban leader Mullah Omar and Osama bin Laden. The outcome was unexpected. Omar asked bin Laden to tone down his activities. The Taliban were seeking international recognition, whereas Osama increasingly embraced the role of a global threat. In response, bin Laden effectively began to divide the Taliban by establishing connections with radical religious scholars, ulama, and Muslim spiritual leaders. Having secured their support, bin Laden issued his famous fatwa, a declaration signed by 40 ulama. It stated that killing U.S. citizens and their allies was the duty and obligation of every Muslim. In response, on August 20, 1998, the United States launched missile strikes on 2 targets. One was a chemical plant north of Khartoum, which had been associated with bin Laden during his time in Sudan. According to the U.S., nerve agents were produced there, while Sudanese authorities claimed it was an ordinary pharmaceutical factory. The second target was a militant training base south of Khost in Afghanistan, where bin Laden was allegedly present at the time his conversation was intercepted by U.S. intelligence. However, he was not at either location when the strikes occurred. A few months later, bin Laden was added to the list of the 10 most wanted terrorists in the world and was labeled terror. A record reward was offered for information on Osama bin Laden's whereabouts. Initially, in December 2001, the U.S. State Department offered $25 million. In December 2007, the amount was doubled. However, it was never claimed, was never paid, as bin Laden was eliminated thanks to information obtained through electronic intelligence methods, rather than from informants. Washington placed responsibility for the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on Osama bin Laden. On that day, 3 planes hijacked by terrorists crashed into the towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon building. A 4th plane crashed in the state of Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. 3 years later, in another video message, Osama bin Laden publicly confirmed al-Qaeda's involvement in organizing these attacks and stated that he had personally directed the 19 hijackers. In his address, he said, "Allah struck America at one of its most vulnerable points. America is filled with fear from north to south, from west to east. I thank Allah for that." At the end of 2001, U.S.-led coalition forces carried out a series of bombings of the Tora Bora cave complex, where bin Laden was believed to be hiding. Later, it became known that he was not killed and had escaped across the border into Pakistan. 3 years later, the Pakistani army organized a major operation to capture the terrorist, but it was unsuccessful. Only on the night of May 2, 2000, after his death, the name of the main terrorist remained on sanctions lists for another 2 years, where it had been included 10 years before his death.